Hello, everybody. My name is Venerable Wade Buripanyo, and I am a Buddhist monk ordained in the lineage of Ajahn Chah at Wat Mapjan in Rayong Province, Thailand, in 2014. I've been staying here at Empty Cloud Monastery for about 2 or 3 weeks now, having a very nice time. A lot of beautiful things happening here at Empty Cloud Monastery. And tonight, Bhante Sudaso has asked me to give a talk on the five powers. And we'll begin with the traditional Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Bhutang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. Okay. Now the five powers come to us in the Pali Canon in a list of the Bodhipakkhya Dhamma, the factors of enlightenment or the wings to awakening that the Buddha identified as the teaching specific to his ministry. While there are many other dhammas that he gave his disciples, such as the benefits of generosity or the benefits of keeping good morality, the Bodhipakkhya Dhamma are the set of dhammas that are specific to his ministry. So while we have teachings on the other dhammas in other religions, the Bodhipakkhya are the teachings specific to the Buddhist religion. And we had some talks recently on the Bojjhanga factors, which are another set within the Bodhipakkhya, a set of 7. And tonight we're going to talk about the five powers, which are closely related also to the five faculties. Another set that is, I think, perhaps one of the most well-known. We also find in the set of the Bodhipakkhya Dhammas another well-known teaching on the Noble Eightfold Path. I mentioned the relationship between the five powers and the five faculties. The five faculties and the five powers actually have the same constituents. So while the five faculties are faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, the five powers actually also are faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, which has been a bit of a puzzle in Buddhist studies. Why do we have two lists with the same factors? So we'll try to get into that a little bit as well in the discussion tonight. With the set of Bodhipakkhya Dhammas, we have several different lists of qualities to be developed on the Buddhist path, and typically to be developed in somewhat of a sequential fashion. And the thinking on it is that the Buddha taught these specific lists, these sets of qualities, to different individuals in keeping with their level of development and their personality, their disposition. So some lists, for example, begin with faith, as these two lists that I just mentioned do, and the Bojjhangas, for example, begin with mindfulness. And a continuous development of appropriate attention. And so while the five faculties and the five powers begin with faith, the Bojjhangas begin with an aspect related to wisdom. And if we look at the Noble Eightfold Path, we see that it starts with right view. And the Buddha, in teachings related to the Noble Eightfold Path, says that right view comes first, this wisdom teaching. So different sets of dhammas, different teachings on dhamma in these list forms, these sequential lists, in some cases have to do with the personality of the individual being taught and where they can start from. So those who have a firm grounding in faith, for example, might start with the five faculties or the five powers, whereas someone who is more kind of a bent towards an analytical approach, for example, with appropriate attention, And mindfulness in the Bhojangas might start with the Bhojanga list. Okay. So we look at the 5 powers again. We have faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, the same as the 5 faculties. It says in the suttas that these two are like a stream or a river that part at an island in the river into 2 and then rejoin on the other side. I think an indication of the close relationship between these two lists, the 5 faculties and the 5 powers. And one commentator discussing them and trying to tease out a difference between the 5 faculties and the 5 powers noted that the one sutta says that in the Sotapanna, that is the stream winner, the faculty of faith is a power. And so this commentator took this as an indication that the powers are stronger than the faculties, or they indicate a level of development that's higher than with the faculties. I'm not sure. One teaching that's been on my mind is since starting this talk, since being given the topic earlier this evening. I'm not sure where to insert it, so I'll insert it here. Is that this list is also plays an important role in the development of the Bodhisattva on his path to attaining enlightenment. When he met his first 2 meditation instructors, he heard their teachings, and he thought to himself, well, this teacher has faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And I also have faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And with this in mind, he thought, well, then what they have attained, I also can attain. This is a teaching that is dear to my heart, because this also was a sort of teaching of my teacher, Luang Por Anan. I remember him telling us, for example, on one occasion, he says, right there within each of you, you have the Noble Eightfold Path, and you have the kilesas, and they're inside of you side by side. He said that, so what you have to do is just stop using the kilesas and develop the Noble Eightfold Path. So he's talking about the Noble Eightfold Path in this particular example. And while the teaching in relation to the Bodhisattva is talking about the 5 faculties, I think the principle is there for all of these dhammas, that within us we have these mental formations. And so the key to the Buddhist path is not cultivating the wrong qualities and putting our minds to cultivating the right qualities. And in fact, this is right effort, the Noble Eightfold Path, and it is the quality of effort in the 5 faculties and the 5 powers. That is putting a stop to arisen unskillful qualities and preventing unarisen unskillful qualities from arising, and bringing into being or giving rise to skillful mental qualities. And once those skillful mental qualities have arisen, or those that have already arisen, we should further and develop. And along with that, there's the message that this is something that all of us can do. Just as the Bodhisattva thought, my teacher has good qualities, and I also have good qualities. Therefore, I can do what they have done. This is an example for us as aspirants on the spiritual path, that we also can follow in the footsteps of those who have gone before us. And in fact, one of the messages of the Kruba Ajahns of Thailand is they, in trying to make this point, they sometimes told us about the struggles that they had in their own lives. I remember a teaching from Ajahn Chah. He said that when he was a new monk, he was going to give meditation instructions to a group of Westerners, actually in England. And he told them as he was getting started, he says when he was a new monk, actually he found it so hard to meditate, he found it so hard to figure out what to do that he broke down into tears at times. And so he was giving us some motivation that even though we find difficulty in our practice, we still can succeed, just as Ajahn Chah did. Okay, now when we look at the 5 faculties and the 5 powers, we can look to the Pali Suttas for definitions of each one. And in the Book of Fours, in the Anguttara Nikaya, we have a definition of each one of the five powers, the five faculties and the five powers being defined as a set of four. So the faculty of faith, which is also the power of faith, is defined as the fourfold faith. It is the faith that the Buddha is rightly self-awakened, the Dhamma is well taught, and the Sangha has practiced well. And faith in Kamma, that is the law of Kamma, the law of intentional action. The faculty of energy, which I just discussed, is the same as the is right effort. It's right effort in the Noble Eightfold Path. I believe actually, I sometimes say the faculty of energy. I believe it's actually usually translated as effort. So to avoid inconsistency, maybe I should use that term. And then if we look at the faculty of mindfulness, that's defined as the four foundations of mindfulness. That is the mindfulness directed to the body, mindfulness directed to vedana, which is usually translated as feeling or sensation, mindfulness directed to the mind, and mindfulness directed to mental faculties. The first set of lists in the list of mental, I said mental faculties, mental qualities. The first set of qualities in that list is the five hindrances and the seven bojjhanga factors, the factors of awakening. The idea being that we try to allay the hindrances, get rid of the hindrances, and cultivate the seven bojjhanga factors, which take us stepwise through mindfulness to concentration, and then to equanimity and the rising of wisdom. All right. And then the definition of samadhi or concentration would be the four jhanas. And the definition of wisdom is the Four Noble Truths. So if you have wisdom fully developed as a faculty, then that means having come to fully realize the Four Noble Truths. And so as an indication that the stepwise development of the five faculties and the five powers leads all the way to a breakthrough to the highest level of wisdom and to the attainment of enlightenment. Right. So faith is an interesting topic, I think, and it can be it's actually even noted in the suttas that there's a relationship between faith and wisdom that be kind of hard sometimes to differentiate. Well, what counts as faith? What counts as wisdom? And it's often been noted, and one of the reasons that the Buddhism is popular in the West now is that it seems like a teaching that calls us to investigate and to try to know, not to take things on blind faith. Okay. For example, if we look at the Kalama Sutta, personally a sutta that I would commend to all those who are interested in Buddhism as a standard for knowing what kinds of teachings to take up and to keep. The Buddha is talking with some people who are new to him. It was the first meeting they've had with the Buddha, and they tell him, there's so many different religious teachers, and they tell us so many different things, sometimes contradictory. And they said, how do we know which teachings are true and which teachings aren't? And the Buddha responds, well, it's very sensible for you to have doubt around this and to be uncertain, because it's a very uncertain kind of situation. So right at the start, validating their experience is really being a true experience and a very understandable experience. And then he goes on to teach them that well, actually, he establishes some common ground. He asks them if breaking the five precepts is skillful or unskillful. And they respond that breaking the five precepts is unskillful. This is something that the Buddha agrees with. And then he turns their attention to, why do people break the five precepts? He says that they break the five precepts because of greed, aversion, and delusion. Okay, so these inner qualities. And so he recommends to them that if they find a teaching that is praised by the wise and it reduces their greed, aversion, and delusion, then this is a teaching that they should keep. But if they find a teaching that is not praised by the wise and does not reduce their greed, aversion, and delusion, then this is a teaching that they can discard. So we have the twofold standard for measure, that which is praised by the wise and that which we find in our own experience reduces greed, aversion, and delusion. And so this is sometimes been called the Buddha's charter of free inquiry. His recommendation that we look into things for ourselves and not just take things on faith. On the other hand, there is the aspect that we should be willing to give things a try, and we don't need to be overly skeptical, and we can't depend on reason. This is a quality, or excuse me, a methodology that the Buddha specifically says that we shouldn't rely on when he's talking with the Kalamas in this Kalama Sutta. He says reason is something you can't really go by because it depends on assumptions, and assumptions can later turn out to be false. Yeah, interestingly, he also says that you can't depend on scriptures either, or even that a teaching is given by your teacher. These also aren't methodologies for discerning which teachings are true and worthwhile. But so even if we hear a teaching and we reason out that we think that this couldn't really work, maybe if we stop and look into it again and say to ourselves, well, the teacher seems wise, and if we look into it again and see, well, is this teaching likely to be harmful? And if we feel like that it is probably not likely to be harmful and it's worth giving a try, if we at least give it a try, then we can see for ourselves. So have enough faith to do something like that. And see what kind of results we get. I offer this as my own personal reflection on how to balance these two ways of doing things: the emphasis on investigation and the emphasis on faith also, and how do we find a compromise between these two. In practice, hopefully faith will grow. That is, if we're getting the kinds of results that we expect to get, and the kind of results that we want. In the suttas, and the teachers place a high premium on having some insight for yourself in the practice, and as exemplified in the attainment of stream entry. As I mentioned before, that in the stream winner, faith is a power. It's through the process of actually putting the teachings into practice and walking the Noble Eightfold Path, or walking the path of the five faculties and the five powers, that one gets the results and actually sees for oneself. With the attainment of stream entry, for example, with the attainment of the path of stream entry, one sees that letting go is the way. And on the attainment of the fruit of stream entry, one sees that actually Nibbana is real, because the citta goes there and experiences Nibbana. Having come back from Nibbana into samsara, there is the knowing in the citta that is the place where we really belong. And that's the sense that stays with the citta. That's the sense that stays with the stream winner afterward, that is the place where we really belong. What we've always been looking for, the pleasure, absent pain, is there. That's where it really is. And this is the foundation for the fourfold faith. Excuse me, the first three of the fourfold faith, that the Buddha is rightly self-awakened, the Dhamma is well taught, and the Sangha has practiced well. That having followed this path, one actually attains Nibbana. Interestingly, in the suttas, there's a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. I think it's the elephant, one of the elephant footprint suttas. The Buddha says that at this point, the stream winner has faith, but it's only when the practitioner attains arhatship that one actually knows. And so that's why this is still classified as faith at this point, even for the stream winner. That one actually knows, I suppose, because the teaching that having attained enlightenment, that we go to Nibbana forever, and therefore suffering is forever extinguished, can't actually be known until you attain arhatship. It's a little bit of speculation on my part. And so it's still classified as faith. In regard to the fourth aspect of faith, that is the faith in karma or kamma, there it's the interplay of mental factors as you go through the cultivation of the insight knowledges. That when one is going through the insight knowledges, that is, which might I think better be explained as like learning stages, having attained concentration, seeing the interplay of mental states and how mental states in some cases even spontaneously arise. I think that's the grounding for the faith in karma. And with it, even though it's not stated in the suttas, it seems that some other aspects of the Buddha's teachings one also develops faith in as well. There was one meditation teacher who was giving a teaching on, giving a class here in the West, and the question came up of, is rebirth really real? And they were going back and forth about it. It's hard to give a logical argument for, that could prove that rebirth is real, I think. Although I've worked up a few of my own ideas. And the meditation master finally just looked back at the person who's questioning him and said, the thing is, once you attain stream winner, then all these questions just go away. And so it's this is something that may not be a very satisfying answer, but I think that it perhaps gives us an indication of why the meditation master sometimes will say, we have to kind of just put aside some questions, and they really encourage us to put the teachings into practice and keep putting the teachings into practice and getting good results, and having gotten good results, to remember that we've gotten good results from the practice, whether in good times or in bad. Remember that the practice is where we find real reduction of suffering, where we find some comfort in life and even some real pleasure, and to try to keep them up, so that they're forced when we find ourselves in bad times. And when we're in bad times, remember this as well, and to try to keep our precepts and keep practicing. As we keep getting good results from our practice, we'll keep moving forward. And someday we all may believe, we may have faith that there really is rebirth in these other teachings as well. So we have faith, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. If we look at the effort, mindfulness, and concentration, I think these teachings are talked about quite a bit. I'm thinking about how much really to say about them now. Having talked about the definitions, I have an inclination kind of to move forward to talking about wisdom, perhaps because of its close relationship with faith. The fourfold wisdom is the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, that when we attain to enlightenment, we, according to the teachings of the canon, we have an experience of life in keeping with the Four Noble Truths. No longer experiencing life as though suffering comes to us from the outside, from the various sensory experience we have. What people say to us, what people do to us. Suffering doesn't come to us from old age, disease, and death, for example, even. While old age, disease, and death are difficult to bear and they're suffering, that's not really where suffering comes from. There is suffering in life, but the cause of suffering is craving. The craving for sensual pleasures, the craving for becoming, and the craving for non-becoming. And that there is a cessation of suffering, and that is the attainment of Nibbana. And there is a path of practice that leads to this cessation of suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. And so many Buddhists practice with this in their daily lives, trying to think about, I'm having some suffering, and where's it really coming from? What is the cause of this suffering? Is it my experience, or is it how I relate to my experience? This was one way of working with the Four Noble Truths. Another way of developing wisdom, I think that is very valuable, is the 5 subjects for frequent recollection. set of recollections given to us in the Pali Suttas, indicated by the Buddha as recollections that everyone should do, whether they're monastics or lay people. I find it quite striking that, well, at least in my own experience, reading suttas, it's the only set of contemplations the Buddha recommends for everyone. If there is another set, I'd like to know about them, but this is the only one that I've found so far. But I've also found it seems like such a foundational list of contemplations. The contemplations that we are subject to aging. We've not gone beyond getting old. We are subject to illness. We have not gone beyond getting sick. We are subject to dying. We have not gone beyond death. And all that we hold dear, all that is pleasing to us, will change and become separated from us. And the fifth being that we are the owners of our actions and live dependent on our actions. Whatever we do, whether good or bad, of that we will be the heir. I believe that this is a method the Buddha recommends for developing wisdom and faith. These kinds of these teachings about suffering and the pathway out of suffering, in respect to experience that we all have and experience that we can validate in our own lives. We all know that we're going to grow old, grow sick, and die, unless we pass away when we're young. And that if we stop and reflect on it, that eventually we have to be separated from everything that we hold dear. And we can see cause and effect relationships in our own lives. And for example, the Buddha pointed out in the suttas in relation to kamma, that we can see this cause and effect relationship right here in our own lives already. We can see, for example, that if we kill someone, we may go to jail, for example. If we tell lies, people may not trust us anymore. He did also teach that there will be ramifications for us in future lives. But at least on that level, we have the experience, and we can see that there are cause and effect relationships in our lives between our actions and the consequences that we experience. And that if we frequently recollect this, then what we know about life intellectually in this way can kind of be developed in the heart. It can seep into the heart. It can develop more and more. It can seep in more and more. So we have a more and more thorough experience of life according to these teachings. We can see it within these parameters, that life is bounded by death, as the teaching goes in the sutras. While life is uncertain, death actually is certain. And this helps us consider our priorities, what is really important to us, what kinds of, how do we have to prepare ourselves for the difficulties we'll experience in life, and how should we relate to those things which are important to us and dear to us at present, knowing that just as with all the other things we've had in our lives in the past, what we have in the present, we must become separated from eventually, as we change and as they change. And these first four recollections we can find in the First Noble Truth. So where the Buddha says, see, I'm not sure that each one is exactly stated verbatim, but the gist is there at least. The Buddha says in the First Noble Truth, there is suffering. And what is suffering? Suffering is old age is suffering, disease is suffering, and death is suffering. Not attaining one's wishes is suffering. Association with the disliked is suffering, and separation from the liked is suffering. And then he takes it a step further to, in fact, the five khandhas, that is the physical and mental constituents that we usually identify with and are attached to, are all burdensome and suffering. And so we can see kind of the gist of suffering there in the first four of these five recollections. Then the fifth recollection is the one about karma, and talking about how we can influence the whole process of cause and effect with our own actions. And then the Buddha says that the development of the Noble Eightfold Path is a kind of kamma. It's an intentional action. And it's neither, as I recall, he says in the suttas, it's neither black nor white, meaning it's not resulting in in pain or pleasure, and it's not resulting in something that is both pain and pleasure, but it's a kind of action that takes us beyond black and white to a state that's beyond all pain and pleasure, I think, or at least not ripening in the kind of samsaric pain and pleasure, because after all, nibbana is pleasure as well. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't misstate that too badly. But I'm trying to draw a relation between the Kamma, we are the owners of our actions and dependent on our actions, and the Noble Eightfold Path as the pathway out of suffering. We see it in a simpler form, I think, in a way that we can all experience in our daily lives in the five subjects for frequent recollection. And perhaps that's the reason the Buddha recommended that all Buddhists try to recollect these five facts frequently. Wisdom is also talked about in another way, relatively frequently in the teachings of the meditation masters in Thailand. I wonder about in the meditation traditions of Sri Lanka and in Burma. They talk about the threefold wisdom. That is the wisdom gained through hearing, the wisdom gained through contemplation, and the wisdom gained through meditation. Apparently, this list shows up just once in the suttas. At least I've only ever seen one reference to it in the Digha Nikaya. Again, it's the threefold wisdom is the wisdom gained through hearing, the wisdom gained through contemplation, and the wisdom gained through meditation. And these are stepwise. So while initially we get some wisdom through hearing a teaching, or in modern times from reading a teaching, and this may be the beginning for us. We should contemplate it. We should contemplate the teaching so that the wisdom grows. And so the wisdom gained through contemplation is a deeper kind of wisdom, and it's a more valuable kind of wisdom. But then the wisdom gained through meditation is the best of all. It's the most thorough kind of learning, and it's the most kind of complete learning, and it's the most transformative. And so that's why we have to practice the Noble Eightfold Paths, the Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, the morality and the mindfulness, and the morality, the meditation, and the wisdom completely. You have to have all factors of the Noble Eightfold Path in place in order to really to attain enlightenment. And we see that in the five faculties and the five powers as well. That we have to have the mindfulness and the concentration also. That without them we can't attain the pinnacle of wisdom. Okay. That's right. All right. Take an opportunity now to take a look at the comments and the questions we might have coming in online. Quite a few people signed in. I'd like to encourage people to write in if you have comments or questions. And I'm reading one now. It's a little bit long. Pardon me. Okay.
Click on it. I can show on the screen for the viewers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so you click right here. Click right here in the middle.
Getting some advice. Oh, yeah, it says show. And
There you go.
Okay. Now we have the question on the screen also for people reviewing. An interesting question here. This is a question on the minds of many students of Buddhism, I think. There are suttas like the Greater Discourse on the Lion's Roar, Majjhima Nikaya 12, that Nibbana is described as a place, as an analogy, but isn't it usually described as a cessation of becoming / going to a place? Okay, that's an interesting question. Yeah. Okay. Looks like we have some interest here amongst the group of yogis who are at the monastery as well. Okay. Yes. And so yes, in the suttas we find some descriptions of nibbana, and quite frequently they're stated in the kind of in the negative, the It's the absence of suffering, for example, is one summation. Sometimes they're described in a positive. It is described in a positive way. For example, as the island, or as I believe it's the refuge. So it's a place that's safe. And it is interestingly, I'm not familiar with this quote in Majjhima Nikaya 12, or this reference that Nibbana is described as a place. As an analogy. I'm not sure I understand the meaning of this question as a place, comma, as an analogy. So perhaps I'll just have to answer the question in a more general way. And it is a bit of an enigma. I've come to my own personal thinking about what Nibbana is, but I hesitate to give it. So may seem too speculative. It seems that one of the reasons we have these kinds of descriptions that are kind of vague in the suttas is that the Nibbana is kind of beyond description in conventional terms. So even something like does the Arahant exist after death, or does the Tathagata exist after death? The Buddha had a tendency to put this kind of a question aside when he's talking about it in the suttas, and instead turn his questioner's attention to something like the Four Noble Truths. He says the important teaching is that there is suffering, that there's the pathway out of suffering, for example. But in regard to whether or not Nibbana is the cessation of suffering or the cessation of becoming, it is described that way in the suttas. But it appears that it's not intended to be taken as an annihilation. So in meaning that when we attain Nibbana, the suffering ends, but it doesn't mean that we end or that we are annihilated. It isn't simply the end of everything for us, that kind of thing. Instead, Nibbana is the greatest pleasure. And it's in reference to this that it says in the suttas that peace is the greatest pleasure. Something we might not normally think of. The peace is the highest pleasure. The meaning being that when you're experiencing uninterrupted peace and satisfaction, without the arising of the kilesas, such as restlessness and boredom, for example, just being one of them, and the continuous experience of a profound peace, that this is extremely pleasant. I thought in my own thinking, I came up with a pretty mundane example. I wonder if anyone can relate to it. So forgive me if I give this and see if you relate to it. I remember years ago when I was a teenager in high school, and I remember waking up on Sunday mornings sometimes. And Sunday mornings in my life at that time were a time when I didn't have anything I had to do. And I oftentimes would have been quite well rested, had a chance to get a good rest in. I could sleep in as late as I wanted to. And you wake up in a comfortable bed, in a comfortable room, kind of slowly open my eyes and look up at the ceiling, and not really have much thinking going on, and feeling so comfortable in my body, and realize, I don't have anything I have to do. And I feel so good. Excuse me. And boy, isn't this like perfect? You just kind of lay there and luxuriate in this. And I've often thought back to those days when I was a teenager in high school. I didn't often have that experience later in life. There's so many demands on us. And that feeling of peace, I think back to it sometimes. I think eventually something would arise to kind of break the peace. Something in relation to the body, or something just in relation to my own mind. I started thinking a little bit more and a little bit more, and started realizing, I really should do this, or I really want to do that, and get bored and become restless, and kind of be shaken from that, and then start my day. So I offer that as a reflection on my own personal way of thinking about the pleasure of peace. If you ever had an experience of something like that, I wonder if you can relate to this idea of peace being the highest pleasure. All right. I wonder if I've answered the question. I feel like maybe I've been a little bit self-indulgent. Um, but this is a sort of teaching I heard echoed from the meditation masters in Thailand that if we think about nibbana, it isn't simply a cessation of becoming. It isn't simply a cessation of suffering, but it's also something that's quite positive in and of itself. As a side note on the cessation of becoming and going to a place, as it's written here, if we look at the Buddha describing, for example, the higher stages of meditation and talking about the experience of enlightenment, if you look at the shorter discourse on the elements in the Majjhima Nikaya, I wish I could remember the number, later in the Majjhima Nikaya. The Buddha is talking to a meditation practitioner and guiding him through the jhanas, all the way up through the arupa jhanas, the formless jhanas, and he talks about papancha. Papancha being proliferative thinking, and he says, "What is papancha?" And it's thinking about, who am I, and what was I, and what will I be in the future, and thinking I will have a body, for example, or thinking that I will not have a body. Thinking that I will have perception, or I will not have perception. And he says that when you get up to get into a state of meditation like this, where the mind is very calm and you can see things very clearly, you can see these processes playing out, how you think about things, and you can also see that this actually is burdensome. And then so right there, the meditator does not form an intention towards either becoming or non-becoming, and immediately is unbound. Okay, because it is the intention, the urge, the craving towards either becoming or non-becoming, having already abandoned craving for sensual pleasures. It's the craving for becoming or non-becoming that perpetuates the process of becoming, being stuck here in samsara. So not forming an intention either way, not giving rise to an intention, is actually the key. It's the moment of release, right there. And becoming defined, I mentioned this in the talk on the Noble Eightfold Path recently, as it says in the commentaries, and I think this is right. Becoming being intentional actions and their consequences. So the craving for becoming, the intention towards becoming, being the intention to take action and experience consequences. The intention towards non-becoming, or the craving for non-becoming, the intention to not take action and not experience the consequences. And so not giving rise to an intention of either sort, then the meditator is unbound. So this is what they're talking about in relation to becoming. In relation to going to a place, this maybe could tie in here in your question. Isn't it usually described as cessation of becoming or going to a place? And so because of this, the meditator isn't reborn again, which is relevant to this particular discourse, because the meditator going into the arupa jhanas could be reborn in relation to the arupa states in the higher heavens. And nibbana typically is not described actually as a place, but we're told that it's simply being outside of samsara. It's difficult to describe it because it doesn't. None of the conventions that we use for describing things in samsara would actually apply. Okay. There we go. I have another question coming in. Dear Bhante, sometimes we do have insights, like everything is impermanent and needs to be let go. But it doesn't last. Where does this stand? How is attaining to path of stream entry different? Oh, that's a great question, yeah. I think this is quite a common question. You've asked a question that comes up for many people in the course of practice, because we have these experiences where we're able to let go of things, and we're able to, at least temporarily, but then we find that we get stuck on something else, or we even get attached to the same thing all over again. Quite a normal experience, and an experience that can be frustrating, and many of us can wonder, well, am I really getting anywhere? Does this path actually lead anywhere? And is kind of a more permanent letting go really possible. The difference here is that that with when we let go of things kind of in our everyday lives while we're thinking about them, typically we're not in a state of concentration where the letting go can be so thorough. Okay. And that's why the Samma Samadhi is so important in the Noble Eightfold Path, why concentration, defined as Samma Samadhi in the five powers and the five faculties, is so important. In fact, it says in the suttas that a path with no samadhi is no path at all, actually. The meaning of this is that, you see, the term samadhi actually means to collect together, While we typically use the translation of concentration in English, we also could perhaps use the translation of unification or mental collectedness. The idea is that the mind is kind of scattered, dispersed throughout the environment and amongst the things that we're attached to. And so what we want to do is work in our meditation to bring the mind all together around the meditation object or the meditation theme. So for example, if we're practicing loving kindness meditation, to keep the mind on track with this focus on the wish for the welfare, the wish for the happiness of ourselves or other beings. And so we focus on that and focus on that and focus on that, slowly allowing the mind or coaxing the mind to coalesce, to gather together around this theme. Or with the breath, focusing on the breath at a particular point, for example, or at least within the body, in allowing the mind to come together on the breath. This kind of mental collectedness. Once we achieve this, is possible to have a number of kind of physical or pseudo-physical and emotional experiences that are quite positive. Experiencing these, the mind becomes quite satisfied and feels quite nourished. For example, with piti. It says in the Dhammapada, I think it is, that isn't it so wonderful? Aren't we so lucky that we feed on piti? It's like rapture, just like the gods, the names of the gods in one of the heaven realms, I forget which one, who feed continuously on piti. And some meditators say that, some of the meditation masters say that earlier on in their meditation practice, they started to get samadhi and started experiencing piti, and it felt so good and it was so nourishing. They wouldn't even go out on bindabat. That's alms round. They wouldn't go on an alms round, and they wouldn't eat for days on end. And they didn't want to because they felt so good because the piti was so nourishing. And so having these kinds of experiences, that's just one of them. In concentration, the mind feels, the heart feels very good, and it feels nourished, and the calm develops. It becomes more and more calm, so that the concentration, the mental collectedness, is more and more stable, less prone to being shaken. And then we can turn the mind to investigation. That is, like, really noticing an object of investigation with relation to, in terms of the Buddha's teachings. So, for example, if you're paying attention to the breath, you might simply notice the breath continuously and analyze it in terms of inconstancy, for example, noticing it coming into being, arising and changing and passing away. Or one might call up in one's samadhi might think of or call up an image of the body or a part of the body, and investigate it from the point of view of, is it attractive or is it repulsive, for example. Okay. Then going through these learning stages, one can experience quite a few emotions also, which also may be quite unpleasant. And that's why it's important to have some stable samadhi. For example, some of them you notice at first the cessation, the passing away and cessation of phenomena. Interestingly, I think that as you're investigating, for example, the breath or another phenomena, the arising and the change and the passing away, you become more percipient of the passing away and cessation, and then you start to feel like, the kind of like everything is dissolving, and this can be anxiety provoking. Actually, it can be frightening. But so you have to work to keep your mind calm as well and be attentive to is the mind calm enough? That's why it's important to have some samadhi. Okay, just as not to go through all of the learning stages. But there is real advantage to getting samadhi in your practice for the benefits of samadhi itself, and also as a platform for insight. The first learning stage after getting some samadhi and investigating experience is that the heart becomes self-aware. Because the heart is unified, it notices the distinction between itself and the sense experience the one is having. Noticing this distinction, it becomes self-aware and realizes that we are not our bodies. Realizing that we are not our bodies, it no longer is so afraid of death, because we're no longer afraid that when the body passes away, that we'll be annihilated. So hopefully also that's encouraging people to practice. That if you practice, you can experience more and more pleasure, greater and greater pleasures. And even if you get the first insight knowledge, then you get something that's really wonderful. This is wonderful wisdom. That the heart itself, regardless of our intellectual thinking, the heart itself experiences itself, becomes self-aware. We know that there's more to us, and it experiences life as being such that there is more to us than just our bodies. And so when one attains stream entry with the entire heart all gathered together, experiencing life as going through the insight knowledges or these learning stages, the wisdom you could kind of say it permeates the entire heart, or the entire heart experiences life in the same way at the same time, and therefore the learning is very thorough. At the last stage of learning, in the learning stages, the heart lets go of everything simultaneously. It doesn't pick anything up, goes to Nibbana. It comes back and knows after that experience that was the path. That's the way to go. But then, if concentration goes down, if one is taken away from the meditation practice, can go back to an experience in some ways of life, like you're having with this question, that you let go of things and the mind picks them back up again. And in fact, that was kind of the experience of going to Nibbana in the first place, that then the heart comes back to samsara. And so we also have to have some patience. The meditation masters, they always try to instill a sense of urgency. You really want to practice. You want to practice a lot. Practice as much as you can. But also, you have to temper it with some patience. Like many things in life, it's a balancing act. And not get discouraged. I wonder if we have any questions here in the group.
Venerable, if I understood you correctly, permanency in Nibbana can be defined as enlightenment?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yes, right. Permanency in Nibbana can be defined as enlightenment. Okay. A question from one of the yogis here. I'm sorry, I momentarily forgot your name. Kobe, right. From Kobe. He says, Bhante, if I understand correctly, permanency in Nibbana can be attained can be understood as enlightenment, if he understands what I'm saying correctly. Okay. Well, they say that once an arahant or a Buddha attains enlightenment and goes to Nibbana, once the physical form passes away, go to Nibbana, that they never have to come back to the round of rebirths. See, I'm going through in my mind here about the meaning of permanency, and apparently the three characteristics of formations here in samsara, anicca, dukkha, anatta, and permanency or inconstancy, unsatisfactoriness, and not self, it cannot be applied to Nibbana. Nibbana cannot be said to be anicca, dukkha, anatta. But I'm thinking about kind of just to extend out of my depth explaining this. So I'm kind of chuckling to myself. But also the opposite can't be applied to Nibbana. So you can't say that Nibbana is niccang or permanent, that it is sukhang or atta, They say that because it is beyond all conventions, it can't be defined in conventional terms. Okay. But I think I probably did use the term permanent in relation to the kind of pleasure experienced in Nibbana. Perhaps I have to invoke the caveat that when we're trying to explain something that's beyond conventions, we're bound to run into problems. But the teaching basically is that going to Nibbana, the Arahant or the Buddha doesn't have to come back to samsara, taking on a body again and experiencing suffering. Maybe we'll put it that way, and perhaps another indication of why the descriptions of Nibbana and the suttas are usually pretty vague. Permanency, Nibbana, or enlightenment. Okay. This is, I guess, I wonder if, strictly speaking, if awakening and Nibbana could be they may be kind of considered splitting hairs to differentiate between them. For example, you might say that awakening or enlightenment is the moment of gnosis when you really see the path. This is the way to do it. And Nibbana is where you go, having let go, having traveled the path. There you go. So maybe in this kind of an explanation, I wonder if that seems like it kind of answers your question. Okay. Thank you. Okay. I wonder if you have any other questions amongst the yogis who are here. Yes, okay.
You mentioned study and patience. How do we know how much to study and how much, or practice in patience?
Okay.
How much to practice and how much to study?
Okay.
How to divide time?
Oh, great. Yeah, great question. Another question I think many people have. How do you know? The question is, let me ask your name. Tate. We have a gentleman named Tate here who's practicing in the monastery for a while. How do we know how much we should practice and how much we should study? How much should we study? How much should we practice? Okay. A question I've had many times myself. I think one thing is, if we're fortunate enough to have a close relationship with a teacher who can kind of gauge what kind of progress we're making, this is very helpful in this regard. Interestingly, I was just thinking earlier about it's funny, the random thoughts that come through the head about the relationship between Venerable Ananda and Venerable Mahakassapa. Ananda is well known for being an attendant to the Buddha throughout much of his career, and he was also well known for learning. I say that at the first council after the Buddha passed away, he recited all of the suttas because he had such a fantastic memory that he could remember everything the Buddha said. And so he's very well known for learning. And Mahakassapa was well known for his practice of asceticism. He was named by the Buddha as the foremost practitioner of ascetic practices. And Ananda considered himself a student of Mahakassapa. I was thinking about this. It's kind of interesting. And so I think perhaps this illustrates that every disciple is different. And while Mahakassapa actually had, according to the suttas, disciples and friends who also were practitioners of asceticism, one of his students, Ananda, was very advanced in learning, and maybe he also practiced asceticism to some degree or other, but I just don't remember any references to him doing so. It doesn't seem to be one of his something he's well known for in any case as a distinction. And so that's this. So every person is different, and having a close relationship with a teacher can be very helpful. And it's interesting that some of the suttas we have in the Samyutta Nikaya, and the section devoted to Venerable Mahakassapa. Mahakassapa kind of rebukes or teases or criticizes Ananda. It's tough to tell sometimes in writing exactly what the tone is. For being involved in many projects, and he's goading him on. That he should be keeping good company, being with practitioners who are serious and developed in their practice, and he should be practicing meditation, basically, to try and advance himself. And he found himself, this is Venerable Ananda, on the eve of the first Buddhist council, according to the traditional story, still striving to attain enlightenment, because all the other 499 attendees were arhats, according to the tradition. He, the 500th, was not an arhat yet. He was a stream winner, and so he was really striving, even up to the last evening, to try to attain arhatship, which, according to the tradition, he did. Attain enlightenment before going to the first council. I think that for each of us, we in the approach that I've taken, for example, there was a time when I was on meditation retreat, and I didn't have much access to a teacher, and I had meditation questions, and I was very lucky to have access to a library with good pseudo references in it, directly related to the practice. And so I went into the books looking for specific answers to specific questions, and it had real benefit to me in my practice. I found real answers there that I could use when I went back to the meditation cushion and keep developing my practice. And so perhaps this is something that we can look at in our own lives, that I can offer for all of us to think about in our own practices is, what kind of experience am I having in study, and where does it lead me? Or what kind of results am I getting from it? And then am I practicing? What kind of practices have I undertaken and am I doing? And what kind of results am I getting from that? And think about the relationship between the study and the practice. Okay. It's kind of like, I sometimes think about studying Buddhism kind of like studying a recipe book. Perhaps because Ajahn Chah was once asked, why do we practice? Why do you practice? Why do we practice? And he says, why do you eat? So I thought studying Buddhism is a little bit like studying a recipe book, And the reason to study a recipe book, at least to some extent, is because we all have to eat, and we want to know how to cook. And but if we don't get around to cooking, and if we don't eat enough, and we're not getting nourishment from our food, then what good is the studying doing? It's really, but studying also does have benefit, whether it's reading a book or listening to a Dhamma talk from a teacher or something like this. So, do you feel like a satisfactory answer? Does it feel okay? Okay. Another question from in the circle here.
Yeah, just a question. A quick question rather. Do you remember the name of the books that you would read to help aid your meditation practice? And if you do, would you mind mentioning what the names were?
Sure. Okay. There's one book in particular that I remember. There may have been a couple of others. The question was, pardon me, I perhaps I don't know how easy it is to hear the yogis here. Of a yogi who just asked if I remembered what the books were that I was reading in that story, and in the book I remember was The Wings to Awakening by Thanissaro Bhikkhu. So that's what I can recommend. Actually, I was practicing with the Bhojangas in particular, and so I go to his section on the Bhojangas and read quite a bit of that. There's also so I found if you cross-reference a bit, you can find information in other sections as well. So if you find that you're drawn to a set of dhammas like the 5 powers or the 5 faculties, you could look to that book for it. I think you'll find quite a bit of good information. I find it so valuable to me in my own practice. Okay. All right. Take a look and see if we have another question here to answer. Oh, wow. Okay. That's a good question. I'm not sure how good a job I'll do at answering it. It's a great question. Let's see if we can get it up here on the screen. Question from someone writing in, Rick, who also wrote another question. So maybe I'll take this one first, and I have to apologize. I'm not sure if I'll be able to take a second question as well because of time. His question is, Venerable, can you share more about how our personality or strengths can help us, depending on where we enter the path? That is either faith or energy, mindfulness, concentration, or wisdom. Okay. Can you share more about how our personality or strengths can help us? Okay. Okay, so having a number of thoughts about these. Well, again, this actually kind of, I think, also brings to mind the talk on the paramis and the parami I was talking about before. in a previous talk. How can our personalities or our strengths help us? Depending on where we enter the path. At first, I thought this question was about how do we identify what our strengths are, and therefore where to enter the path. But this actually is a little bit different, isn't it? How our personality or strengths can help us, and depending on where we enter the path. Okay, so all right. So we're talking about the five faculties and the five powers. It starts out with faith. Having faith, one can exert an effort. And develop mindfulness. Developing mindfulness, one brings the mind into samadhi, and then wisdom arises. This is one way of looking at it. It's also possible, actually, to start out with wisdom, as I mentioned before. And so, what this is about is kind of seeing, I think, what kinds of things resonate with us, and getting to know ourselves, paying attention to some degree in relation to others, and also, seeing. If we find somebody who's very inspiring in a certain quality, for example, how do we compare in terms of that quality? If we look at Ajahn Mahabua, who came to mind in relation to the first learning stage, or insight knowledge. When he attained the first insight knowledge, he did so by having developed samadhi. He sat in meditation all night long one night. And he without moving, he made a determination just to sit in place, because he began feeling some pain. And so he said he wanted to finally get to the bottom of pain and see what it's all about, because after all, physical pain falls within the province of the First Noble Truth. And the prescription the Buddha gave us with regard to the First Noble Truth is that the suffering is to be understood. And so right there, sitting in meditation, he said, I'm not gonna move until dawn. And he talks in his sermons about how he was someone of a very resolute nature, who could put forth a lot of energy to accomplish whatever he said that he would do. And so he had this self-knowledge. He knew about himself to this degree. And so he knew when he's sitting there in his shack, or his hut out in the jungle, he started feeling some pain when he's meditating, that if he made a determination to not get up until dawn, that he could do it. And it was tremendously fruitful for him. At the end, he says that having endured intense pain and applying mindfulness and wisdom, his discernment to the situation, when dawn broke and he rose from his meditation, the heart was bold, exuberant, and utterly fearless. A really wonderful reward to get from a nice meditation, I think. And he says the fear of death died that night. Perhaps part of the reason that he had is he knew that he could keep this determination was that he had developed his samadhi based on a determination. Having seen his practice go up and down for years, he made a determination, well, now, no matter what happens, no matter where I am and no matter what I'm doing, I'm always going to stay with my meditation word. And he found that he was actually able to do it. And that as life went by in a blur, even as he went through his daily activities, and then when he went back to his shack to practice meditation, he single-mindedly kept with his meditation word. And so, and he did develop what he described, according to his talks. He developed this kind of rock-solid samadhi, as he said, trying to give his disciples and give us some motivation that if we practice, we really can get these kinds of results, and that each stage along the path has its own rewards. And so if we look back over our own practice and look back over the years of our lives and see what kinds of things do I do, what kinds of qualities do I have, how do I negotiate difficult situations, for example, how do I respond to different kinds of circumstances. And we can learn about ourselves and what kinds of qualities we have. And as we try to practice, we can see, what works and what doesn't work. If I make a determination, for example, to sit still for an hour and a half practicing meditation, is this something that I can do? And if I did, if I was successful, what was it that kind of got me through it? And if I wasn't able to do it, why was it so difficult? Where did it seem like things kind of broke down, or whatever? This is I think, an important aspect of developing wisdom around ourselves, and how we're doing. And so while we each have these qualities of faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, we probably will find that we're strong in some areas and not so strong in others. And I discussed the five faculties as a stepwise instruction. Each of these five qualities to be developed in sequence. There actually is another teaching about them to be being developed in balance. It's kind of so there it's in relation to a different kind of effort, though, and the energy, the physical energy that's expended in the practice. So for example, if we I'm sorry, I'm kind of going a little bit roundabout here, but I want to make leading around to a point. When we get to the quality of energy, for example, there's a story of the Venerable Sona, who practiced walking meditation too much. And was thinking that he wasn't really getting anywhere in his practice, even though he was walking a lot, and that maybe he should return to lay life. And the Buddha counseled him, actually, the problem is that your practice is out of balance. You're expending so much energy, but the other qualities that you have aren't developed enough to support that kind of energy in the practice. So you can practice walking meditation. It sounds like Venerable Sona did. He practiced walking meditation, as I recall, like all night or something like this. But he didn't develop enough mindfulness and concentration in the practice to really get a reward from it. And so the Buddha says that you have to tune, just as you would tune a lute, tune your effort to the pitch of the other four qualities that you have. And so in relation to how our personality and our strengths can help us, if we pay attention to what kinds of strengths and weaknesses we have, and try to see, what level of effort is right for me, and what kinds of effort are right, for me. If my heart, if I find that practicing meditation just makes me makes me feel frustrated, for example, or I feel like I'm not getting anywhere, but I feel very inspired practicing giving, then maybe this is an avenue to develop. You can practice more giving and keep your precepts and keep up your meditation practice, but maybe not found all of your hopes on it, and not have such high expectations for it. This kind of thing. It's for each one of us to negotiate on our own. And this, for example, the practice of dana, if we're practicing dana, is very supportive of the path to enlightenment. It's listed in the suttas as one of the prerequisites for developing the Noble Eightfold Path. It's something the masters point to as one of our parami. For example, the spiritual qualities that we can develop over time, and which cannot be reduced, and which develop the power of our mind, so that we can attain our spiritual aspiration. And in fact, was a spiritual quality that, according to the traditional story of the Buddha's enlightenment, the Buddha referred to in defying Mara, saying that in fact he had developed his parami sufficiently to attain enlightenment. He asked the earth goddess to bear witness, I should say, that he had in fact developed his dana parami, and therefore he had what it took to attain enlightenment. Okay. I wonder if we have any comments or last questions from the group here. We've got a venerable Jagaro with us, a middle monk who's on Tudong from a Bayagiri monastery, with us just a couple of days ago, I think it was, and here for another couple of weeks. And so want to ask also if you have any questions, any comments to offer. Let's put you on the spot.
That's okay. It's okay. Well, actually, the first thing that came to mind is actually I'm curious about some of the other questions that are there. But that was the first thing that came to mind. Maybe the other question that came to mind is running your time with Lukpa Nun, and how he would, would you give like different teachings to different people, or would you generally try to give kind of like, in other words, would you do like kind of a lot of individual guidance, or would you do more kind of desanas and to large groups of monks or lay people? How was his teaching style?
Oh, okay. The question is about the teaching style of Luang Por Nun. Akin Chinel, the abbot of Wat Map Chan. Well, he would when he gave talks, they were much more remarkably more focused than my talks. It's one of the things about his teaching style. So Luang Por Nun is my teacher. I ordained at Wat Map Chan, and his style was, it goes for every teacher has their own style, and perhaps for those who are interested in his style, I might commend them to take a look at his online offerings, because he'll often give a talk each night, or at least they'll play a recorded talk as part of their evening worship service that they broadcast on Zoom each night. It can be found at watmapchan.org. So I feel a little bit self-conscious talking about Luang Por Nun and specifically, but he's, I think is common for the teachers in the Ajahn Mun lineage to give talks and to give desanas. Ajahn Mahabua once described the talks of the Kruba Ajahn as being kind of the lifeblood of the practice. That Ajahn Mun, for example, would gather his disciples together frequently in the evenings and give them desanas, and the monks would feel quite fired up to practice after the talks. In addition to getting the practical information about how to practice, they'd also feel quite inspired to do so. And so some of the masters would actually sit for long periods of time with their disciples in meditation and guiding them in meditation. And of course, they also gave specific advice to specific disciples, and Luang Por Nun would do that as well. He didn't usually sit with us for long periods of time, providing instruction, but he'd give us Dhamma talks quite frequently. And so he'd also give us specific instructions. We could go to him with questions, or sometimes even just as we're going about our business in the monastery, if Ajahn Nun happened on us, he'd just give us like a one-sentence teaching, do this. I remember one time I was waiting in line with my waiting in line to take food from the offerings that the lay people had brought in, so to put food into my bowl. Standing in a line of monks, and Ajahn Nun walked up. He was at the head of the line, of course. He had already taken his food, and someone had taken his bowl. He was walking back along the line, saying hello to a few of the monks, and then he comes to me. He looks right at me. He says, "Wade, eat all of the food in your bowl." Okay. Yes, thank you. Okay. So, and of course, these kinds of practical instructions are very, very valuable in the practice. Because even a practice like that, if you have to eat all of the food that you take every time, when a monk, at that time we were eating one meal a day, and so it's quite a long time between meals. You have to be very careful, very mindful about exactly how much food you're taking, what food you're taking. If you think, I have to eat everything, absolutely every mouthful, and I want to take the right amount, not too much, not too little. And so it's quite a good training. So that's something else that he would do as well. Okay, good. And I think that he also takes questions online. I know that Luang Por Suchat, Apichat, I think his last name is Apichato, but he can be found by Pra Suchat, Prasuchart, a disciple of Luang Ta Mahabua, also does Zoom broadcasts. And I believe he takes questions. And so it's another option. And Luang Por Nun also is available if you go on retreat at Wat Map Chan. He'll be available to to do a little bit of question and answer with lay people who go into the monastery, and of course monks, and bhikkhunis and manchis, everyone who goes in, the monastics here do make themselves quite available for giving teachings as well, and so there are opportunities to practice meditation at the many monasteries here in America as well, and do question and answer, hear sermons as a regular feature of the monastic life in this tradition. All right, with that, I'm kind of winding down. I think we'll bring this broadcast to a close.
Handamayang Dhammakataya Sadukarang Dadamase Sadhu 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 Anumodhami.
Well, I hope you found something of interest in this talk, and until next time, we'll see you, and good luck in your practice, and I hope you realize many benefits from the Buddhist teachings.